Okay, let's talk about carbohydrates. The reason I want to talk about carbs is they get demonized a lot. People are unsure of whether they should have carbs in their diet or not, or unsure if carbs are bad. And um, much of the negative press that gets associated around carbs is actually more related to processed foods, heavily processed foods with lots of added sugar plus lots of added fat. So it's not just the carbohydrate that's the problem. In fact, it's not the carbohydrate at all that's the problem, same as it's not the fat as that is the problem, not in isolation at least. It is over processed foods with excessive amounts of added sugar and added fats, coupled with an excessively sedentary lifestyle. We are just simply not as active as we used to be, and the majority of us. A lot of that's related to our work and everything like that, and that's where the hysteria around carbohydrates comes from. So I'm going to explain a little bit what it is. I'm going to try and keep this concise and not waffle too much. I'm known to be a waffler, but we'll see. And try and keep it to just a few minutes long, and I've went a minute and a half already just giving the introduction, so probably not hold out too much hope for that. But I'm going to explain what a carbohydrate is, what it's used for, and how the body digests it. Alright, so I'll try and get into a bit of a roll here. Okay, so first off, carbohydrate is a macronutrient. It's one of three macronutrients along with protein and fats. Macronutrient basically means that it is a nutrient that the body needs in relatively large supply, as opposed to micronutrients, which is your vitamins and minerals. Okay, we can categorize carbohydrates as two types: simple and complex. Simple carbs are sugars and are sourced naturally in things like fruit and dairy products, and then obviously unnaturally in the excessively added sugar that gets added to overly processed foods. And complex carbohydrates, which is from starchy sources such as rice and potatoes and grains. Okay. Simple carbohydrates are digested easily by the body, which means that what happens in the digestive process on both simple and complex carbs is once a carbohydrate is ingested, the body breaks it down, digests it, and it gets converted into glucose, which enters the bloodstream and elevates our blood sugar. Simple carbohydrates get digested fast, which means that the glucose gets released into the bloodstream fast, which means that our blood sugar elevates quite quickly. It's known as a spike in blood sugar levels. This is valuable around when we need a burst of energy, so around training sessions and stuff like that. If you consume some simple carbohydrates before your training session, you will have some readily available energy there to be used during said training session. Complex carbohydrates are slower, more difficult for the body to break down, so the conversion into glucose and the release into the bloodstream of that glucose is slower, which gives us a more steady stream of released energy over a longer period of time. What happens once glucose gets released into the bloodstream then is we have insulin. Now, insulin is the hormone which regulates glucose. It's also been demonized a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit about that now, but without good reason, at least not in healthy, well-functioning individuals. For diabetics, it's a different story, but that's for another video. Okay, none of my current clients are diabetic, so I'm not going to speak about diabetics right now. I'm going to speak how it relates to you as a healthy, well-functioning individual. So what happens is when glucose is released into the bloodstream, there's a rise in insulin levels, which is the hormone that regulates glucose. Insulin signals to the cells in the body that there is glucose readily available in the bloodstream. So it basically tells the glucose where to go, or at least tells the cells that require the glucose to absorb it from the bloodstream. So that glucose gets absorbed almost immediately by all the cells that need it for energy. Any glucose that is then left over in the bloodstream, insulin shuttles it off to be converted into glycogen, which then gets stored in the muscles and also in the liver for future use when there is no glucose readily available. So the thing to be aware of is carbohydrate is actually the body's preferred energy source for many functions, many of the cells in the body prefer to use glucose for energy over the energy that comes down over lipids, which is the energy that's broken down from body fat. Now, from a dietary fat, should I say. Now, the reason that insulin gets a bit of a bad rap is because when insulin is elevated in the bloodstream, it stops the body's process of metabolizing stored body fat for energy. And people think that's a bad thing in regards to weight loss. Now, once the current meal that it is actually digested and broken down and metabolized, the carbohydrates converted into glucose, goes into the bloodstream, the cells absorb the glucose, whatever's left over gets converted into glycogen and off to the liver and the muscles to be stored. Normal service is resumed. So the insulin levels drop again really quickly. As soon as this process is completed, insulin levels return to normal and the body's normal functioning of metabolizing stored body fat for energy returns to normal as well. So the hysteria and the fear around both carbohydrate intake and insulin is very, very unjustified for us healthy individuals. And actually for those of us who are training and who are active, carbohydrate intake is very, very important, as it is the preferred fuel and energy source to fuel our active lifestyle. So I did waffle a bit. I went on a little bit longer than what I wanted to, but hopefully that explains a little bit about what carbohydrates are and what insulin is and what their roles are in the body. And the more you know, the less you can be duped and deceived by snake oil salesmen who are out there to capitalize on fear and use that for their own gain through selling various products and diets and stuff like that.